The doorbell rang on a Saturday. That alone was weird. My life was quiet, peaceful, and built just the way I liked. It's the kind of peace you have to fight for, brick by painful brick, over the rubble of a past you've tried to bury. My partner, Alex, glanced up from his coffee, raising an eyebrow. I just shrugged. We didn't do unannounced visitors, ever. I opened the door, and my past didn't just flood in it, was a tsunami, standing on my porch, looking smaller and grayer. Then I remembered were my parents, Richard and Carol. And right behind them, pale and shaky, was my older sister, Amelia. Nobody spoke for a second. The silence was so thick with 10 years of things left unsaid, of abandonment and anger. It was 10 years ago that this exact same family tossed me out with a trash bag of my stuff and a shattered heart. And now, here they were, standing on the welcome mat of a life they swore I could never build. I knew instantly they weren't here to apologize. They were here because they needed something, were desperate. They had come to the person they threw away, the daughter they called a failure. To beg for the one thing I had that they didn't, my top-tier, life-saving corporate medical insurance. The day it all broke, to really get the nerve, the sheer audacity of them showing up on my doorstep, you have to understand the day they broke me. Or at least, the day they tried to. I was 22, and the world was supposed to be my oyster. But according to my parents, that oyster had to be opened with a very specific tool, a medical degree. Our family home was basically a shrine to their values. Everything was perfect, orderly, and all about projecting this image of flawless success. My dad, Richard, was a mid-level bank executive who measured a person's worth by their job title and credit score. My mom, Carol, was his loyal second-in-command, and her life's mission was managing the family's image. And then there was Amelia, my older sister. Amelia was the golden child. She never stepped a single toe out of line and was on the perfect pre-law track they'd mapped out for her. And then there was me. I was the crack in their perfect wall. For 2 years, I really tried. I enrolled in pre-med, I suffered through organic chemistry, and I stared at anatomical charts until my eyes blurred. But my heart just wasn't in it. My soul was somewhere else, entirely lost in sketchbooks full of character designs, in notebooks bursting with story ideas, and on the glowing screen of my laptop where I was teaching myself digital animation. That's where I actually felt alive. The breaking point came during my sophomore year. I had just bombed a major physics exam, the kind you just don't come back from. And honestly, I felt relieved. It was the escape hatch I was too scared to open myself. That night, I scraped together what little courage I had and went downstairs, bracing for the storm I knew was coming. They were all in the living room, a perfect picture of suburban life. My dad was reading the financial news, Mom was flipping through a catalog, and Amelia was, of course, studying. I cleared my throat, and it sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I have to tell you something. I started, my voice shaking. I'm not going back to pre-med next semester. I'm dropping out. I want to apply to art school. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. My dad slowly lowered his newspaper. His eyes, which could switch from distant to glacial in a heartbeat, pinned me to the floor. "You're what?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I can't do it anymore," I said, the words just tumbling out. "It's not me. It's making me miserable. I'm good at art. I love it. I really think I can make a career out of it." Mom let out this sharp, ugly laugh. "A career? Don't be ridiculous, you doodle. People don't have careers in doodling. They starve." "It's more than doodling," I insisted, my voice getting a little desperate. "It's graphic design, animation. It's a real industry." "It's a fantasy," Dad cut in, his voice rising. "It's a hobby for a child. We are not paying for you to go play with your hobby. We are investing in your future. A future as a doctor. Respectable, stable, and profitable." "Amelia, finally?" looked up from her book with this look of pity on her face that was so much worse than their anger. "Just do what they say," she said, like it was the easiest thing in the world. "It's not that hard." But it was that hard. It felt like they were asking me to saw off a part of my own soul. "No," I said. The word tasted like both freedom and terror. "This is my life." And that was it. The floor just dropped out from under me. My dad stood up, his face a mask of pure fury. "Then it's a life you can live somewhere else," he said, and the words felt like a death sentence. "We will not have a failure under this roof. We will not enable this adolescent rebellion. You are a profound disappointment." The pain from those words was physical. I've heard that rejection can light up the same parts of your brain as actual pain, and I can tell you it's true. It was a searing, gut-wrenching feeling. I couldn't breathe. "You're kicking me out," I whispered, the reality finally hitting me. "We're setting you free to pursue your passion," Mom said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Go be a starving artist. See how that works out? Don't come back here asking for a handout. In fact, don't come back at all until you've made something of yourself, something we can be proud of." I looked at Amelia. One last desperate plea. She just shook her head and looked back down at her book, completely erasing me. I was excommunicated. They gave me an hour. I stumbled upstairs in a total daze. How do you pack for the rest of your life in an hour? I grabbed a black trash bag and just started stuffing things in. Some clothes. It's my laptop. My most precious thing. My drawing tablet, a few sketchbooks. I left behind the photo albums and the childhood trophies. I left behind the girl they thought I was. When I came back downstairs, dragging my pathetic luggage, they were waiting by the door. My father held it open but didn't even look at me. My mother stood with her arms crossed, her face like stone. As I stepped out into the cold night, the last thing my father said to me was, "This is the consequence of your choices." Then he closed the door. The click of the lock was the sound of my world ending. I just stood there on their perfect lawn. In the warm light from the windows of the house, I was no longer welcome in, and I had never felt so terrifyingly alone. The long road up those first few weeks were just a blur of sheer panic. I had a couple $100, a trash bag of my stuff, and a beat-up car that sounded like it was gargling rocks. The word homeless was basically tattooed on my forehead. I was so ashamed and so hurt that I couldn't bring myself to tell any of my friends what happened. So I just vanished. I spent my nights trying to sleep in the driver's seat of my car in a 24-hour Walmart parking lot, jumping at every single noise. My days were a scramble. I got a job washing dishes at a greasy spoon diner, where I constantly smelled like stale coffee and bleach. The work was brutal and my hands were always raw, but that paycheck meant I could afford gas and instant noodles. It meant I was surviving, all the while. Their voices were on a loop in my head. Failure, disappointment, you're throwing your life away. I started to believe them. The isolation was a heavy blanket that smothered me. It's a terrifying thing. To realize that if you disappeared, the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally wouldn't even notice. The turning point wasn't some big movie moment. It was small. I was on my lunch break at the diner, sketching on a napkin. The waitress, a woman named Maria with kind eyes and a tired smile, glanced over my shoulder. "Hey, that's really good," she said, pointing at my drawing of an old man at the counter. "You've got a real talent." It was so simple, just a few words. But in the emotional desert I was living in, it felt like a rainstorm. It was someone seeing me, not my situation. That little bit of kindness from a near stranger was the spark I needed. It reminded me that the girl who loved to create was still in there somewhere, buried under all the shame. That night, instead of just crashing in my car, I opened my laptop. I found online forums for artists and writers. I started just reading, then eventually posting some of my old work. The feedback was actually helpful. I found a community. It wasn't family, but it was a connection. with that tiny flicker of hope. The real grind began. I got a second job stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store. My life was a miserable cycle. Work at the diner, drive to the grocery store, work till dawn, sleep for a few hours in my car, and repeat. Every spare dollar was saved. It took me 3 months to scrape together a security deposit for the cheapest, grimiest studio apartment you've ever seen, having my own key. My own lock and a mattress on the floor felt like winning a war. It was my sanctuary. My life was split in two. To the world, I was a low-wage worker, but in the few precious hours in between, I was a student at the University of the Internet. I devoured tutorials on graphic design, UI/UX, coding anything I could find. I practiced for hours, my eyes burning, living on caffeine and carbs. I built a portfolio from scratch, making up fake projects for fake companies. I failed a lot. I sent out hundreds of emails to potential clients and heard nothing back. The first few jobs I landed paid pennies. There were so many nights I'd just lie there staring at the ceiling of my sad little apartment, thinking they were right. They were right. They were right. But then I'd remember the feeling of that door shutting in my face. And a different feeling would rise up. A stubborn, defiant anger. I refused to let them be right. My success wouldn't be for them. It would be my revenge. My first real break came about 6 months in. A small local bakery needed a logo and a website. The owner saw one of my posts on a forum and took a chance on me. I poured my entire soul into that project. I barely slept for a week, obsessing over every single pixel. When I showed it to her, she cried. Happy tears. She loved it. And she paid me $500. That check felt heavier than gold. It wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that I could do this. That one job led to a referral. That one led to another. Slowly, I started building a list of clients. My freelance income grew. After a year, I quit the diner. 6 months after that, I quit the grocery store. I was a full-time freelance designer. The relief was so huge, it felt like I could finally take a deep breath. My career took off. I was good at what I did, but more importantly, I was reliably trained. You learn pretty quick when you're desperate. 2 years later, one of my clients, a fast-growing tech startup, offered me a full-time job as their lead designer. I'll never forget reading that offer letter. When I got to the benefits package, my hand started to shake. A 401k, paid time off, a TAY, and health insurance. A real comprehensive medical, dental, and vision plan. It was more than a perk. It was a symbol. Was armor? It was proof of the security I had clawed my way toward. I had gone from being a kid with nothing to a woman with a career, a future, and a safety net I had woven all by myself. That job is where I met Alex. He was a software engineer, brilliant, funny, and kind in a way that felt like coming home. He was the first person I ever told my whole story to. He didn't see me as a victim. He saw a survivor. With him, I learned what real support felt like. Together, we built a life. We bought a modest little house. We adopted a scruffy dog from a shelter and named him Buster. Our life wasn't flashy. It was something better. It was safe. It was happy. It was ours. I had built a new family on the scorched earth of my old one. I had proven my parents wrong in the best way possible, by being happy and successful completely on my own terms. My story of having to rebuild from scratch isn't unique. So many people have been there. If you've ever had to start over, share a piece of your story in the comments. Your resilience could be exactly what someone else needs to read today. The knock on the door the Saturday my past came crashing back was, ironically, a perfect day. Sunlight was streaming into the kitchen. Alex and I were planning a weekend hike, and our dog, Buster, was snoring at my feet. It was a picture of such complete, peaceful, domestic happiness, the very thing I used to dream about when I was sleeping in my car. And then the doorbell rang. The sound was an intrusion, a violation of our peace. I padded to the door, Buster growling softly behind me. I opened it, and the perfect picture of my life shattered. There they were, Richard, Carol, Amelia. 10. My dad's hair was thinner, more salt than pepper. My mom's face was etched with new lines of worry. But Amelia, ... Amelia was the most changed. The old confidence in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, glassy fear. She was leaning on my mother, and her skin was a sick, pale color. My first thought was, they found me. How? I changed my number. My social media is locked down, ... Then came the anger. The absolute, unmitigated gall to show up here, on my porch. At my home, hello? My mother said, trying to sound warm, but her voice was brittle and fake. I just stared. My mind was a mess of emotions, white-hot anger. Yes, but also old pain and a flicker of something else, ... Maybe the ghost of the little girl who just wanted their approval. Aren't you going to invite us in? My father asked. He was trying to sound authoritative, but it came out like a plea. Alex came up behind me then, his hand on my shoulder. His presence gave me my voice back. What are you doing here? I asked. The words were flat, empty. I was a stranger talking to strangers. Amelia swayed a bit. Please, Carol said, her composure finally cracking. Amelia isn't well. Can we please just come in? Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Not for them. It's for the ghost of the sister I used to have. They shuffled into my entryway, their eyes darting around, taking in my home. I could see the surprise on their faces. This was not the hovel of a starving artist. This was a life. It's a successful one. We stood there in a charged, awkward silence. Finally, my dad, ever the practical one, got to it. We need your help. He said, the words sounding like they physically pained him. Amelia is sick, my mom added, her voice thick. She has a rare autoimmune disorder. The treatments are so expensive. We can't afford it. I looked at Amelia. She just stared at the floor, drowning in shame. I found out later that my dad had been laid off a year ago. My mom's part-time job didn't have benefits. And Amelia, who followed their perfect plan and went to law school, had burned out after a few years from crippling anxiety. She was now working a low-paying job with terrible insurance. Their perfect world had fallen apart. We found out through your cousin Martha that you work for that big tech company. My dad continued, his voice heavy with his own failure. She said they have incredible benefits. World-class medical insurance. And there it was, the real reason they were here. The punchline to a decade-long joke. They didn't want a reconciliation. They wanted a transaction. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a resource. We need you to add Amelia to your plan, my mother blurted out. As your sister, as family. It's the only way. Please. It's the least you can do. It's the least you can do. The phrase echoed in the room. The breathtaking entitlement of it. The least I could do, after they had done the absolute most to destroy me. The anger that had been simmering inside me started to boil over. This wasn't a request for help. It was a demand based on a twisted idea of family obligation that they themselves had burned to the ground 10 years ago. The unraveling eye pointed to the sofa. Sit down. My voice was unnervingly calm, like a placid lake over a volcano. Alex gave my shoulder a squeeze and backed away into the kitchen, giving us space but staying close. My silent reinforcement. They sat on the edge of the cushions, looking uncomfortable. I stayed standing. I wanted the height. For the first time in my life with them, I had the power. I let the silence hang there, forcing them to stew in it. I looked at them, and I didn't see the giants of my childhood who held my world in their hands. I saw 3 broken people who had come to raid the life I built in spite of them. Okay, let me get this straight, I said. My voice even, you threw me out. Key, you told me a failure. You told me not to come back. Key cut me off and left me for dead at 22. And now, 10 years later, you show up and demand that I give you access to the single most valuable thing I have earned in the life you wanted no part of. My father flinched. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I shot back, my voice getting hard. Don't you dare try to rewrite history in my living room. Do you have any idea what it's like to sleep in your car in December? Do you know what it feels like to be so completely alone you start to wonder if you even exist? The pain I had buried for a decade was clawing its way out, but it wasn't the weak pain of a victim anymore. It was the sharp, righteous anger of a survivor. We did it because we loved you, my mother tried. Her eyes filling with tears that I knew were for herself, not for me. We were scared. We wanted you to have a good life. You wanted me to have your version of a good life? I said, a life that fit your story. You didn't care if I was happy. You cared about your bragging rights. And when I refused to play the part, you threw me away. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of me. I turned to Amelia. She was still just staring at her hands. And you, I said, my voice softening just a little, but not with pity. You just watched. You were my sister. Could have called. Could have sent a text. Anything, but you chose them. And look where it got all of you. Right back. Here, on my doorstep. I paused, letting that sink in. You told me not to come back until I'd made something of myself that you could be proud of. So, tell me, are you proud now? Is my benefits package finally good enough for you? The sarcasm landed like a slap. My father's face was white. My mother was openly crying now. Now, let's talk about the logistics, I said, shifting my tone to be cold and practical. Because you clearly haven't thought this through. Do you think adding someone to a corporate health insurance plan is like sharing your Netflix password? It's not. Generally, you can only add a spouse or dependent children. To even have a chance of adding a sibling, I would have to legally prove to my company and the insurance provider that Amelia is my dependent, that she lives with me, and that I provide more than half of her financial support. We're talking about a mountain of legal paperwork, and it's not even a guarantee. On top of that, it would make my premiums skyrocket. I stopped pacing and stood. Right in front of them, you're not just asking for a favor. You're asking me to legally and financially chain myself to you. It's the very people who taught me that family ties can be cut at any moment. Do you see the irony in that? The massive, crushing irony. They had nothing to say. There was nothing they could say. All their excuses turned to dust in the face of the reality I was laying out for them. The power had shifted for good. They were no longer in charge of my life. They were adrift in a sea of their own making, and I was the lighthouse they had tried to tear down. This was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. Deciding what to do meant weighing years of pain against what some people might call duty. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with your family? Let's talk in the comments about how complicated that can be. The choice and the aftermath, the final decision, just hung there in the air. They looked at me, their faces a pathetic mix of hope and fear. They were waiting for me to be the good daughter they had tried and failed to raise, the one who would set herself on fire to keep them warm. That girl was long gone. I took a deep breath, stood up straight, and gave them my answer. The word was quiet, but it hit them like a punch. This wasn't a no from a place of revenge. It was a no forged from years of self-preservation. It was a no that honored the scared, lonely girl I used to be and protected the strong, peaceful woman I had become. I can't and I won't add Amelia to my insurance, I said. You burned my world to the ground years ago, and I had to learn how to be my own light. My resources, my money, my home, my peace, and yes, my insurance are the bricks I used to build a shelter from the storm you threw me into. I will not tear down my own house to patch the walls of yours. Their faces just crumbled. But I wasn't done. I refused to be the monster they always said I was. I wouldn't be as cruel as they had been. I walked over to a small desk in the corner and picked up a folder. However, I said, turning back to them, I'm not going to do nothing. I had a feeling you might show up after you spoke to Martha, so I did some research. I handed the folder to my father. In there, I explained, is a list of every public health program and state-sponsored insurance Amelia is probably eligible for. There are printouts on how to apply for Medicaid. Information on charities that give grants for her specific condition. And numbers for social workers who can help you navigate all of it. I've given you the tools to help yourselves. That is a kindness you never, ever gave me. This was my decision. It wasn't about burning a bridge. It was about drawing a boundary in concrete. I was offering them a map, but I refused to carry them to the destination. Their reaction was a sad mix of disbelief and anger. My dad started sputtering, and my mom accused me of being cold and unforgiving. But their words had no power anymore. I walked to the front door and opened it. It was a clear dismissal. They stood up, defeated, and shuffled out. As the door clicked shut, just like it did 10 years ago, the feeling couldn't have been more different. Back then, I was the one cast. Out into the cold. This time, I was safe inside, warm and secure. Alex came and wrapped his arms around me. It didn't feel like a victory. It just felt like a quiet, sad peace. A chapter was finally closed. In the end, this was never really about insurance. It was about respect. It was about consequences. I learned that family isn't an obligation you're born into. It's a verb. It's something you do. It's in the actions of support, love, and respect. I had to lose one family to build a new one that was stronger and more real. And I realized that forgiveness doesn't always mean you have to let people back in. Sometimes it just means letting go and fiercely protecting the life you've fought so damn hard to create.